And we're at the top of the hour. And since you, John, you're batting cleanup, I'm not going to go through the whole spiel of rules and regulations because everybody's behaving themselves.
Good.
I don't anticipate us having any issues. Tech's been our friend, so we're going to knock on wood that nothing goes wrong in this last one. But otherwise, got a great, compelling topic. We're going to keep the CX party going. So I'm going to
Very
step
good.
aside and let you get it rolling, John.
Very good. And just chime in if there's any questions that pop up. Happy to answer those, Bill. Thank you.
Absolutely, sounds good.
Well, thank you, Bill, and good afternoon, everyone. This is unacceptable. When I think about the situation at this point, I am beyond frustrated. I don't want somebody to contact me. I don't want to talk about this. I've already decided that absolutely not. I'm not going to renew the contract next year. Wow. Yeah. Customer feedback doesn't get much more brutal than that. And that was the situation I faced a few years back. I was on the phone with the sales VP and the account director that owned that customer relationship. And I knew on that call the stakes couldn't be higher. This customer's contract was worth close to $200 million, critical for the business. I knew if that contract actually was not renewed, that account director would lose their position. That sales VP would not be able to make their quotas for the next year, just wouldn't be able to make it up with the other customers in that region. And not only that, there was the potential spillover effect to the broader customer base. This customer was well regarded in their industry, seen as a thought leader and innovator, and was looked to for best practices. And so it was highly, highly likely that if this customer went away, competition would use it against us. So we were on the phone that day, strategizing around how can we reacquire this customer and keep them from leaving. So I'm John Whitaker. Really great to be on this call today, and thanks to Bill and the Accelerant research team for inviting me to talk about a topic I'm always excited about and passionate about, and that is customer experience management systems. Mark's presentation was a great setup for what I'm going to cover today and focus in on. And I've had the very good fortune in my career to work on customer experience management systems across a lot of different businesses, both B2B and B2C systems in a variety of industries. And over the years, I've benchmarked and talked with practitioners across a variety of businesses. And one of the interesting things I've seen are reoccurring themes around how to best extract the best value out of what these systems can produce from an informational perspective. I mean, you think about it, customer experience has never been more important. As we come out of the pandemic, customers are going to be finding a new way and finding their way to a new normal and trying to figure out what does that new normal looks like. So there's going to be a lot of change happening over the next couple of years. And so these systems are critical for understanding the changing environment and how our customer is feeling and showing up and how best to meet the needs of this evolving customer. So really exciting to share the themes that I've seen over the last number of years on the do's and don'ts around extracting best value out of these systems. Of course, we're familiar with the common components. Mark went into wonderful detail around the common key performance indicators that we're familiar with. And there's a lot of different ways to deliver that customer survey. And the reason I have both of these elements on one page is how you deliver the survey can greatly influence the results you get for your key performance indicators. Mark talked about one of the most common ones, Net Promoter Score. And so how that survey is delivered to your customer can greatly impact that NPS result that you see on the back end. And Bill, I'd be curious from Accelerant Research's perspective, how have you seen the interaction between these two elements, how the survey is delivered versus what then metrics come out of that survey?
Yeah, and I don't know, it's always been a fascinating topic to me. I guess over the years I've been beaten down so much that I've gotten to a point where, you know, I've just surrendered to the fact that surveys, customer experience management there's going to be inherent biases, right? You know, depending on data collection method, what have you. And it's always, you know, so long as I, the research manager, can, you know, keep it at least a common level of bias or equal bias so that I can compare results across waves or across, you know, regions or stakeholders within the company, you know, admitting that, yeah, the bias is what it is. But again, if I'm making at least fair comparisons, then I'm okay with it.
I agree. Each method comes with its own benefits and drawbacks. Something I experienced in my career was the following. And the data are amassed, but I inherited a legacy program. And the survey was delivered via an invitation on the purchase receipt the customer got at point of sale. And over time, we started to experiment with delivery of the survey via a mobile app. And the beauty of the mobile app is it leveraged the capabilities of the smartphone. And the key capability was there's a GPS chip in those smartphones, and the GPS chip knows where people are. And so it would know if the shopper was in the location of interest for us. So you could push out, after that store visit, push out a survey invitation. And we saw, in this case, customer satisfaction. We saw a dramatic difference in scores. I mean, it was a very large difference. And it immediately begged the question, well, gosh, why are we seeing such a dramatic separation in scores? The URL on the purchase receipt tended to give really high, strong customer satisfaction scores, whereas the scores coming out of the mobile survey they weren't terrible, but they weren't great either. They weren't anything to celebrate. And so the fortunate thing is, though, having the purchase receipt, it could be tracked back to a specific transaction that could be connected to the customer database. And looking at the customer database, you could see long-term behaviors of these individual respondents. And what we found was those responding to the invitation on the purchase receipt tended to be highly loyal, highly engaged shoppers for this brand. Conversely, the mobile survey tended to show feedback from a shopper who was much more representative of the full diversity of shoppers in our database, both good and bad in terms of loyalty, good and bad customers. And so what we found was the mobile survey actually yielded a much more realistic result, much more realistic of the full universe of shoppers that we served versus the receipt invitation and the older method of the shopper having to type in a URL address into their browser. And I don't know, Bill, have you seen similar kinds of things in your work where you see a dramatic difference in terms of results? Same survey, just different delivery vehicle.
Something to unmute. There we go. Yes, it can be huge. Um, and again, delivery vehicle and channel that someone is coming in based on. Um, and what we find also, that it opens up the whole line of questioning into, survey design based on, where they're accessing, what device they're using, if it's, a screen like I'm speaking to you on, or if it's, a smaller like mobile, that interface can change my participant experience. I know we're talking about customer experience, but there's additional factors that can come into play there.
That's a great call out. I love that language you use, Bill, participant experience. And that's so important. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And you also hit on very important survey design. One of the things I've seen over the years is if your survey is too long, you reach this inflection point where the respondent becomes so fatigued, they start to check out, and the scores, all else being equal, the scores start to drop dramatically. And what I've seen over the years is moving from right to left, that inflection point keeps moving closer and closer to the left side of this graph, indicating that, the customer's attention span and willingness to take a long survey is becoming less and less and less over time. I think it's just the effect of social media, how we consume information today, how it's consumed in very small bite-sized pieces. So a big long survey can also work against you. And fully agree, Bill, with your observation that that survey also has to be optimized for how it's delivered. What kind of device is it being taken on? And that's something you can very easily monitor with your survey software. And it's important to know, how are your customers completing your survey? Is it on a laptop? Is it on a mobile phone? What is the device? And that can be helpful guidance to you for designing your survey. Because of course, from an experience perspective, we want to prevent what this cartoon shows. We want to deliver an experience that reinforces the brand promise. We want our survey to show our customer that we care, and we care about their time, and that we care about their feedback, and that we're going to take action on their feedback. What we don't want to do is have the survey be a point of frustration. I like how Mark referred to car dealerships and how obnoxious they are in this regard, and really create an experience that leads to customer regret. And so making your experience as powerful as possible from a surveying perspective is important. Recently, I took a survey from American Express as a cardholder of theirs. And I really loved it because up front, I was told it would take less than 5 minutes. It only took about 2. It was very respectful of my time. And the questions were very well designed and clearly designed with me in mind as the customer, and making it easy for me to provide feedback. And I really enjoyed that experience, and it reinforced positive perceptions I had about that brand. One of the things to watch out for, and this is a big mistake a lot of companies make, is tying the results of the customer experience survey to compensation. It's good-natured and well-intended to do that. You want your organization to be customer-focused. You want them to deliver great experiences. But what this cartoon illustrates in a humorous manner, but it happens every day in the real world, is when you start to link NPS or customer satisfaction or any other score to compensation, it starts to drive and incent bad behaviors. Let me give you an example, a real example I experienced. Pre-pandemic, so this would have been 2019. I think it was in August. Later in the month, my two teenage sons and I went to Buffalo Wild Wings. We always enjoy going there and generally had a good experience. At the end of our meal, the server came out. And with great fanfare, I was presented with the check, but told if I completed a customer satisfaction survey right then and there, I would get $10 off my next visit. My sons and I visit with enough frequency where that was compelling. So I got out my phone. The survey was pretty easy to take. Knowing how these surveys work and knowing that likely in the manager's office, they were watching the survey come in real time, I gave them good scores across the board because I wanted my $10. Sure enough, I finished my survey, hardly even put the phone away. And the manager comes running out. She's all excited. She's beaming. She runs up to me and is profusely thanking me for the great scores I had given. And not only was I going to get $10 off my next visit, but she was so happy. She gave me $10 off my visit that day. It knocked off over 25% of the check. Crazy. So of course, the next time I visited Buffalo Wild Wings, what scores they got on that survey. So bribery absolutely works. But of course, that distorts the system. It distorts why you have a customer experience management system in the first place. If you're paying your customer to take the survey and you make it very clear that good survey scores result in monetary reward, you've totally ruined the purpose of the system. There's no way that system is yielding useful data if that behavior is widespread in the system. There's no way it's yielding useful information to improve the customer experience. And I don't know this to be true, but an implication could be, let's say you have a customer who comes in and they're in a bad mood and nothing you can do really helps them be satisfied or happy with their meal. My guess is maybe they don't get invited to do the survey. So linking incentives to survey scores ultimately destroys the usefulness of the system. Mark talked about this nicely in his previous presentation, and customer experience isn't just about the customer. The employee is so important in the experience. Now you might be thinking, well, my customer is engaging with a website. But keep in mind, behind the scenes, behind that website are company employees who hopefully are continually improving that website experience, acting on customer feedback to enhance the information and capabilities of that website and continually improving it. So everywhere there's a customer interacting with your brand, there's an employee somewhere in that equation. So understanding the customer and their perspective of the experience that they've had is really important, but so is the employee, and the employee is equally important in this relationship. And an example from my past, many years ago, well over 10 years ago, I was in the fast food industry. I didn't work for McDonald's, but like all fast food restaurants, the drive-through is critical. Obviously, it's important during the pandemic, but it was equally important 10, 20 years ago. And so in the customer experience management system I ran, the first cut of the data was looking at the customer experience for dine-in versus drive-through. And since 70% of the volume at that time went through the drive-through, spent a lot of focus and energy on that drive-through experience. And our data was coming in continuously. It was a great program. And all of a sudden, we started to see a strange trend. We started to see customer satisfaction slowly start to trend down. And then we went to the next level diagnostics to see what areas were we coming up short in. And two things popped immediately. One was order accuracy, and the second was rudeness, perceived rudeness of the store employees. And these same complaints were showing up in the open-ended comments that we would get as well. And so this was puzzling. Why did this all of a sudden those two attributes start to trend upward? And in lockstep. So clearly there was some association between order accuracy and perceived rudeness. And it was strange. So I connected with the operations organization. And right off the bat, we got feedback, very meaningful feedback, that a speed of service initiative had started the same time those scores started to, or those problem areas popped up. And the speed of service issue or speed of service initiative was around the drive-through. And really the only way to increase your sales, if you're a fast food restaurant, is to increase the throughput of the drive-through. Because important day parts like lunch, it's a very fixed period of time. And so the only way to increase sales is to just serve more customers in that fixed period of time. So the fact that there was an emphasis on speed, serving more customers in the same amount of time, made perfect sense that order accuracy had become a problem area. You go faster, you're going to make mistakes. Makes a lot of sense. But rudeness, why were rudeness complaints going up? That was just puzzling. And so I realized a mistake I had made was focusing too much on the customer side of that experience and not thinking about the employee side of the experience. So we went behind the counter. We went on the other side of the window and spent time with the employees. It was actually an in-depth ethnographic study. And we wanted to understand what was the impact of serving more customers in a fixed amount of time. What impact did that have on employees? And taking that employee-centered point of view brought it all to light, and it unlocked the key to the mystery we were dealing with. And what we found was that in serving more customers in a fixed period of time, it was creating a lot of stress and strain on the store staff. And of course, moving more quickly, order accuracy mistakes inevitably increased. And of course, what happened then is the customer would come into the store and say, hey, I ordered French fries. They aren't in my bag. Can I get my French fries, please? And what we saw was the crew member was so stressed about filling this order that when they had to also at the same time get product for the customer who had an accuracy issue, it created a lot of stress. And what the customer saw was the employee reacting to the order accuracy issue, the employee going, oh, because they're stressed about getting that order out the window, but at the same time, now they've got to do something additional. That stress, that body language that stress brings on was perceived as rudeness, even though the employees were not rude and did a great job when not stressed with the customer. So it was a great learning for the operations organization, and they were able to change the order processing procedures to make order processing more efficient, easier to get the order correct the first time, and it eased the stress on the staff. So when there was the need to engage with the customer, the employee was less stressed out and able to provide that friendly feedback and interaction with the customer. So really digging in understanding that employee perspective and experience is critically important in understanding that ecosystem you're measuring. I had another opportunity to validate the importance of employee feedback. I had a large data set, many years of data, and I made the simple assumption that, well, gee, I'll look at customer satisfaction, for example. The higher customer satisfaction is, the better sales will be in the future. Makes perfect sense. But what I found was zero correlation, not able to create a meaningful, predictive model of future sales from customer feedback. And this was puzzling. So I partnered with those in HR that do human capital analytics and track things like employee tenure, performance review ratings, things of that nature. And when we incorporated that data, the employee side of the experience into the customer data, we were able to find a very robust and strong correlation predictive of future sales. So it showed to me quantitatively and reinforced my experience in fast food that that voice of the employee is so critically important. And so integrating that employee data is important, but there's lots of other data sources that can be incredibly powerful for you. Obviously, social media generates so much data daily. There's so many ratings and review sites that provide information that are important for your system. So integrating everything into one space it can really increases the power of your system. And even in a B2B context, extracting data out of something like Salesforce.com can further add to the power of the data. And there's a lot of great dashboarding tools out there. Some do a lot of really amazing things, but can be kind of expensive as well. But even something as simple as Tableau can be a great way to get your program more accessible, the data to your key stakeholders, and to do so in a simple way and a very cost-effective way. And I'm curious, Bill, from Accelerant's perspective, what kinds of best practices do you see in this area of both data integration as well as dashboard?
Yeah, it's been amazing in, I'd say the past decade, the emergence of, all of these different platforms and the ease with which we can now sort of weave them together. I can look, maybe 5 years ago when, if you wanted to do a lot of this data integration and dashboarding, you have to create something custom. You get, developers involved and just ridiculous amounts of time, effort, and ultimately cost, to the point where it would often become cost prohibitive and never get off the ground. I feel like we're moving into a space that's much more equipped to be able to handle a lot more of these in more of an off-the-shelf manner, right?
Well, thank you. I agree. The technology's advanced so much just even the last few years, and it's amazing. Let's keep moving along. This is somebody, if you don't know who it is, you should. Fred Reichheld invented Net Promoter Score. It was first published back in 2003, and in the Harvard Business Review, and it was well received at the time. And you fast forward today, it's amazing how many Fortune 500 companies use Net Promoter and believe in it as a key metric. And I'm always surprised that across a lot of different industries, you'll even hear companies, their CEOs talk about their NPS scores on earnings calls, for example. So it's interesting to see how what Fred created has blossomed across a lot of organizations. To be honest, as a one number system, I'm not a believer in solely focused on Net Promoter. I like a more an index approach, but I certainly have incorporated Net Promoter in many surveys I've managed. Bill, I'm curious, what's your perspective or experience been with Net Promoter and your clients?
Yeah, I mean, it is, wrinkles and all, such a ubiquitous number. And I think because it is just easy to comprehend, easy for executives and non-researchers to grab it and run with it. We have at Accelerant, we have our own loyalty model that we built. A lot of companies do. We're very proud of ours from a strength standpoint and predictability of, in our case, share of wallet. But every loyalty model, that I come across includes likelihood to recommend, advocacy as, a key component. So there's no question that NPS is on to something. It's just, it is a portion of the equation. But you can't argue with the fact that it is just so widely used and accepted, and we just sort of have to get on board with it because it's here to stay. That's for sure.
You're right. It's so widely used, and so many of us use it in our surveys. So I thought it was interesting to look at, what does Fred think about his creation, fast forwarding today? Because as the creator, if anybody's got a credible opinion, it would be Fred. And so what do I appreciate is, he mirrors what we've talked about today thus far. He's talked about that, absolutely not, do not link it to bonuses, financial incentives, the like. Don't focus in on that single metric, but rather it's the open ends and the richness around open ends that matters. And in the example I opened with, that customer giving really fairly bad open-ended feedback, their closed-ended scores, including Net Promoter, were not as bad as what their open-ended comments revealed. In other words, NPS, they were a detractor, but in terms of the scale usage, they were pretty close to the point of indifference. And so too often what I've seen in customer experience management systems is the scores don't always reveal the truth about the customer's experience and aren't nearly as actionable as the open-ended comments that you get. And experienced practitioners of NPS mirror this across a number of different industries. I think a useful and interesting example on this page is USAA. Typically, insurance companies stink on Net Promoter and get lower scores than many other categories. Yet USAA kills it on Net Promoter because they deliver an outstanding experience. But I think in part, they deliver an outstanding experience because they recognize it's the open-ended comments where the magic is. And that's what's actionable. And that's what can ultimately lead to a virtuous, continuous cycle of improving the customer experience. And I'm kind of curious, Bill, what have you found in terms of the balance of, you get that quantitative metric back, but then you've got all this really rich and wonderful open-ended feedback as well?
Yeah, I always give the analogy of quantitative versus qualitative research. So you can beat internal executives over the head with charts and graphs, about what's happening and what you're seeing, but sitting in a back room with an exec and the light bulb that goes off in their head when they hear these words come out of a customer's mouth. Yeah, I've been telling you this forever, but but that guy just said it, and it is just so incredibly powerful. And that's, that's the nuance that you get from these open minutes.
I agree. And it's like, going back to my example, the call to action was the open-ended comment, I'm not going to renew your contract. That inspired action. If we looked at the NPS score, likelihood to recommend, and saw we got a 5, it would have been like, it would have been nice if that was higher, but there wouldn't have been much of a call to action in that. Now, of course, getting through those open-ended comments, that's always the challenge, isn't it? So one of the important things I found is with real-time dashboarding, being able to process those comments as they come in, as they are provided, can be really powerful, especially if you're in something like restaurants or hospitality or retail, where you've got a lot of different units out there. Getting those open-ended comments in real time to the unit level leaders greatly increases the actionability of those open ends and makes it much more easy to internalize and process those open ends, because then you're not getting hit with a tsunami of open-ended feedback if you look at just a quarterly or even monthly roll-up. And it's great. And then many times, if it's coming in real time, service issues can be addressed and service wins can be celebrated to reinforce a great experience. Something I've done many times is it's easy with Python code or using something really easy like Alteryx to set up exception reporting that flags open-ended comments that should be reviewed by a human being, and setting up multiple different rules that provide that visibility. So you can see, is there something that needs following up with respect to that customer or not? And that's fairly easy to do and put into place and then adjust over time. And of course, there's a lot of talk. You go to a lot of conferences. There's discussion of machine learning and specifically natural language processing. And I think there's a lot of power in that and potential in it. I think it'll slowly but surely get better over time. The downside is you need really, really big data sets. And the other thing is it's going to be tough for still many, many years for machine learning to be as good as human beings. So going back to my example, that open-ended comment that was so harsh. Ultimately, the folks that were best able to interpret that open-ended comment were the VP of sales and the account director, who knew that customer and knew that respondent very, very well. So they had that perspective of context and history of relationship and what was going on with that customer. And so no machine learning system's going to be able to impart that kind of wisdom and judgment to an open-ended comment. I'm kind of curious, Bill, are many of your clients using natural language processing for their open ends?
Yes, and with varying degrees of success. I think I'd agree and just echo the sentiment of there's a lot of potential, but we're not there yet. And I think when you accept that and sort of weave in, the human element with the machine element, that's where the magic happens at present, right?
Absolutely. Something I found in the past, of course, this is dependent on your customer segment and how they like to take the survey. But if you're with a consumer that tends to be responding via a mobile device, capturing their open-ended feedback via audio can be incredibly powerful. You tend to get much more detailed feedback. It's a much better experience, obviously, for the respondent because it's easy for them to talk and they're used to talking into their phones. And the software is getting very, very good to do the voice to text translation. So think about your customer segment and how they're completing your survey And that might be a good alternative for you to test and try out. Now, in B2B, it can be less important. And if you have certain customer segment where that doesn't work out, then obviously that's not a good option. But something worth trying if you've got that kind of customer and they're using their mobile device a lot. So let's go back to my story. So very brutal situation, $200 million contract that's pretty close to going away. Obviously, bad things will happen if that occurs. But the open-ended comment went on that customer provided detailed feedback why they were unhappy and specific points that were incredibly useful for us to create a reacquisition strategy. The points given mirrored some feedback other customers were providing. Action had already been taken and investments being made to address those customer experience pain points. And so a plan was formulated, starting off with a quarterly business review that was coming up. And in that quarterly business review, talking about with that customer, the investments being made to improve the customer experience and hard data showing that system-wide, the experience was slowly but surely improving. And using that as a starting point to rebuild trust and to build up a track record of improving the customer's experience, improving it in a way they could readily recognize and their staff recognize. And over time, that occurred. And a year later, when it came time to renew that contract, trust had been rebuilt. The experience was dramatically better for that customer compared to what it had been, and that contract was renewed. And so full credit to that, ultimately, that open-ended comment being actioned against by the selling team that owned that customer relationship. And they were ultimately able to harvest that relationship. But the key point was the magic was in the open-ended comment, not in the closed-ended feedback that we got from that customer. And with many customers, that was the case. It was the open-ended feedback that was so powerful and important. And so what I've learned across a lot of customer experience management systems, companies, industries, B2B, B2C is, we've talked a lot about the don'ts, and those don't do's are reinforced by the inventor of the Net Promoter Score. And so from a best practices perspective, I think the most important thing is not linking financial incentives to the score, because that will only just result in bad behaviors and things that will ultimately bias the data and make your system less than useful for improving the customer's experience. But absolutely, so much power in the open ends. And so as much as you can, automated reporting of those closed-ended comments to free up team time to focus in on the open ends can be very powerful and lead to some really great insights. As we talked about integrating other data sources, particularly the voice of the employee. And so, for example, if you're working on a B2B business, getting the voice of your sales force and those frontline reps interacting with the customer can be incredibly powerful and helpful for your system. And make sure your customer sees that you're acting on their feedback and that they can see in the experience that it's slowly but surely improving, because then they're going to know that when a survey is executed and they see that survey invitation, something will be done about it. So I really enjoyed our time today. Hopefully you've learned something, and it was, and hopefully complementary to what Mark shared previously, but open to any questions anybody might have or comments.
And any questions for John, please pose them now. I have a couple. So if I, John, am member of, a small corporate insights team, 3-person, I have this customer experience tracking instrument on one hand, but I'm also juggling product development research, brand tracking, and copy and ad testing. Um, with that, how do I keep from getting just completely bombarded and buried by the open-ended responses?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. I think something that's simple and easy to do is one, automate as much as you can the closed-ended stuff. So, and the way you can do that fairly easily, what I've done in the past is you get your data set coming in from either your survey provider or the survey platform you're using, then process that data through Alteryx, and then have that closed-ended quantitative data then flow right into a Tableau dashboard. So you just run that Alteryx routine, and then in real time that dashboard gets updated. But in terms of your question, Bill, about the open ends, that same Alteryx routine, you can put in there the exception reporting. And what I've typically done is in Alteryx, then a PDF report gets generated and provides the open-ended comments along with the respondent ID. So then you can look at fairly quickly the open-ended comments and process those fairly efficiently. And if you do that with some kind of regular frequency during the week, certainly it depends on how much volume you get back from your system, that can make the processing of open ends much, much easier. So a good example on what kind of rule you might set up in Alteryx, something I've done in the past is there were certain key metrics that were important in terms of indicating happiness or unhappiness, goodness or badness with the customer, and then using those metrics to then flag open-ended comments that might need to be reviewed.
I think you may have alluded to this in your presentation, but when those flags exist, what's your opinion on granting access to, I guess, internal stakeholders, even down to like, if we're talking retail store manager level, right? The
Oh, that's
folks
very
who,
important. Oh,
yeah,
that's critically important because like when I was in restaurants, so well over 10 years ago, but when I was in restaurants, each store manager had access to their scores, only their scores. And that was important. And having that real-time access was important because if there was, for example, some customer service misses, that could quickly be addressed with coaching of that crew member. And many times it's just a training gap because, for example, in restaurants, you have so much turnover. You always have people on staff who don't know everything they need to know. So that real-time access is important. Or on a B2B system, or having real-time access for your business owners is important. And even getting that to the sales leadership that own those customer accounts is important because ultimately the salespeople can't hit their sales quotas and goals if they don't know how their existing customers are performing and feeling. And so that's critically important. And so I would highly encourage the democratization of data within an organization and flowing it out to those individuals who can action against it.
agreed. I always find that to be a difficult ask. As insights professionals, right? You're the stewards of the data, right? You have to go through me in order to get to this information. Opening up and sharing can be a scary undertaking at times.
It can, but what I find is, Bill, when you cascade the information out to that lowest level of customer interaction, it allows for the actioning against those tactical needs and concerns. And then that frees the team up to think about what are those 2 or 3 macro strategic things that need to be addressed. So for example, going back to my order accuracy and rudeness example, that because the tactical data and the actionability of that was pushed out to the restaurant store owners and managers, we could then put focus resources against that employee ethnography I talked about, and spend time really decoupling that employee experience so that it could then influence that program. So it should be freeing for the team and allowing the team to do much more added value work, high ROI work for the organization.
What about, and I mean, I have lots of questions. What's your take? Something on, I guess, comparisons within a hierarchy, right? So you've got different stores or restaurants. I've always been interested in and taken by the sort of the conundrum that exists, that in many cases your highest traffic units tend to also be much lower performers when it comes to, the SAT and loyalty metrics, right? They're much busier. So if you're comparing, high traffic to low traffic stores, it looks as though the low traffic are really killing it from a SAT and loyalty standpoint. How do you reconcile that type of thing?
Oh, you're right. You're exactly right, Bill. It's a U-shaped curve. So what I mean is, as store volume or customer volume goes up, you'll see a positive relationship for a while, but then it goes back down because, let's say it's a grocery store. I've not worked in grocery, but if the line is 10 deep for checkout because it's such a high volume store, of course, as a shopper, you're not going to be happy with that. And I've even seen the same effect in B2B. Like B2B selling to, like, for example, $100 billion organization. They're pretty hard to please, and it's easy to have hiccups because they've got so many corporate sites that you're trying to serve. So you see the exact same kind of thing in B2B, as well as retail, restaurants, hotels, and so on. And so you've got to, that's part of that data integration piece, and it's important to integrate in that volumetric data like revenues, for example, and margin, and those other kinds of business metrics, knowing that then, oh, wow, this is a $80 million a year store. They're killing it. They're busting at the seams. So of course, their scores are lower. And of course, there's things you can do statistically as well to recalibrate based on that. Once you've established, there's that kind of relationship.
Awesome. Let's just do a final check. Any last questions for John before we wrap up? No, you're the end of the day, so everybody's absorbing quite a bit.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Bill, and thank you for those of you who were online since 11 a.m. That's quite the run, but it was really fun to be with all of you today and really enjoyed the opportunity. Thank you, Bill. Thank you to all of Accelerant Research for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun.
This was great, John. Thank you. Great closer, and really appreciate it. And appreciate everyone attending. Be on the lookout for info for next month's event, and everybody stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bill. Bye now.